So we'll get started. Good evening, and welcome to the second event of our third three-part virtual series called Santa Barbara Belonging, Commemorating Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. I'm Therese Chin, co-chair of the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation's Asian American Affinity Group. I am honored to introduce tonight's presentation titled Santa Barbara Belonging, a Community Conversation. As we begin this event, we want to acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of our region. Let's take a moment to honor these ancestral grounds that we are collectively gathered upon and support the resilience and strength that all indigenous peoples have shown worldwide. We are on the traditional territory of the Chumash peoples. The month of May is National Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Throughout the history of the United States, Asian American Pacific Islander, or AAPI communities, have made significant contributions that have helped build our nation. These same AAPI communities, however, have faced generations of adversity and injustice at the hands of racism. Over the past several months, acts of violence and racism against Asian Americans have escalated across the country, causing fear and outrage within our communities. The time is now to gather as AAPI community members, as friends, and as allies to explore the complex history of racism and the Asian American experience. It's time to listen and get to know our local Asian American small business owners, and to celebrate the vital and diverse cultural traditions of our Asian American community. As a member of the AAPI community in Santa Barbara, I can proudly say that we belong here. Thank you for choosing to be here with us tonight. By coming together this evening, and just being here, we are expressing resistance to the ignorance, prejudice, and racism that has fueled acts of violence against the AAPI community. These acts have caused outrage and fear for many of us. To lay groundwork for healing and action, we will continue our series with a community dialogue. Tonight, for the second part of our Santa Barbara Belonging series, we will be joined by Allison Yin of Shanghai and Wild Lavender, Jill Agonis of Divinity Santa Barbara, and Tommy Chang of More Donuts. As we engage with the experiences of our friends and neighbors, we will explore ways to support the AAPI community and serve as allies when needed. Some housekeeping details. Our presentation this evening will be closed captioned with subtitles for the convenience of our audience. You can find the control to turn on or turn off subtitles in the bottom right-hand corner of your Zoom screen. It is an icon, it is a CC icon that you can pick up on or get a drop-down menu with options. If you do not see the CC icon, click on the More icon with the 3 dots and you should see the option there. This presentation will be pre-recorded and will be made available at a later date at the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation website and the YouTube channel. During the presentations, you can ask your questions using the Zoom chat function or by submitting them using the Q&A function. Both are located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you use the chat function and would like other audience members to see your question, you will need to hit the drop-down menu in the chat box to make sure you send it to all panelists and attendees. After the presentations, our speakers will be joined by the Trust Executive Director, Dr. Ann Peterson, and together they will answer some of your questions. We will not get to all of your questions, but we will try our best to do as many as we can. Before we begin, we want to poll our audience to learn a bit about who you are and what you hear. Kevin will pull up a Zoom poll question. Let's wait a minute. It's coming on. We can take there it is. So there's 2 questions. what brought you here tonight? A, I am a member of the AAPI community and want to learn more and be involved. Or B, I am an ally of the AAPI community and want to learn more and be involved. So please take a second here to answer the poll question. And then Kevin will be sharing the results with us as well.
Great, we'll give it another few seconds here so people can answer. Thanks, Therese. I just wanted to say that was last week that Anne was joining, and this week she won't be joining the panel, but
oh, that's right. Sorry.
But I left that in there, so that was my mistake. But she's in the audience. Hi, Anne, our executive director. And I apologize. I know, Therese, your video froze a little bit, but I think you're really clear. Your at least the sound. So I hope everyone could hear that full introduction. So I'm going to end the poll and show the results here.
Okay. That's great. So for the first question, we have 52% of the audience. And for the second question, we have 48% of the audience. So 52%. I'm a member of the AAPI community and want to learn more and be involved. Thank you, Kevin. Before I introduce Kai, I'd like to sincerely thank Santa Barbara Belonging Series sponsor, the Griffiths Foundation, who has continually supported all of our programming for our Asian American series. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the evening and my co-chair of our Asian American Affinity Group, Kai Temper. Kai is the Outreach Program Manager for the Santa Barbara Bowl Foundation. As well as being the co-chair of our committee, she also serves on the City of Santa Barbara's Arts Advisory Committee. She is Japanese American and grew up here in Santa Barbara. Kai, thank you.
Thank you so much, Therese. Hello, everyone. It's great to be back here virtually with all of you. So I've been really looking forward to tonight's event. I think this is a really great way to spark some community dialogue and celebrate our diverse AAPI community. It's such a great way to really just come together and learn from one another. Having this event also feels very timely, as part of are celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Today marks the 100th birthday of Yuri Kochiyama, who is a civil rights activist often associated with Malcolm X and was an advocate for a lot of very important issues. And then yesterday would have been Vincent Chin's birthday. And Vincent lost his life tragically to violent crime that was racially motivated, mistaken as a Japanese person. So I think it's great to take a moment to really just honor and respect, the lives that have been lost to the hands of racism, and also, honoring the legacies of important activists and elders and ancestors who have come before us to really lay a foundation for being able to do this work today. And I'm excited to have our guests today here. I think collectively we can find ways to make sure that we can lay a positive future for years to come. So joining me today, we have Jill Agonius and Allison Yin and Tommy Chang. And it feels really special to be in conversation with all of you today because I know all of you, and you all have such unique backgrounds and offer wonderful businesses in our community. So I'd like to give you all a moment to just kind of introduce yourselves. So maybe Allison, would you like to come onto the screen and tell us a little bit about yourself and your businesses?
Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Yin. I'm first generation Taiwanese American, and I was born and raised here in Santa Barbara. My family has owned and operated Shanghai restaurant on Milpas for the past 40 years or so. And I just recently started my own lash and brow business, Wild Lavender, in 2019. And I'm
Thank
super
you.
excited to be here today. So thank you so much for inviting me to join this conversation with you.
Absolutely. All right, next, let's have Jill. Welcome, Jill.
Hey everyone. Thank you so much for putting this together, Kai and team. I feel really honored to be here and to be part of this conversation. My name is Jill Gonius. I've lived in Santa Barbara for 11 and a half years. I went to UCSB and was one of the lucky people to stay. And I am Filipina American, first generation. My parents immigrated to the States when they were in their 20s, and I was born in LA. They're entrepreneurs as well, so I feel really grateful that ever since I was a little girl, watched them grow their businesses from literally nothing to being quite successful in the healthcare industry now. And I'm not in healthcare. I'm in a different type of wellness. I own a Divinity Yoga studio, and I took over about 3 years ago. And our mission at the studio is to create a lighthearted and inclusive space to practice yoga, grow, and connect. We're outdoors and virtual for now while we're renovating our studio, which is really exciting. And we're hoping to be open towards the middle to late summer.
I'll also add, you're an exceptional teacher. So any of you that are in the audience, if you'd like to deepen your yoga practice, Jill's your girl. Thanks, Jill. And then last but certainly not least, I'm so excited to reconnect with Tommy, who's an old friend of mine. Tommy, will you please give us a little bit of background on yourself and your wonderful new business that has been kind of this new craze that everyone's been talking about. And I know you're on pause right now, but tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, first, thank you, Kai. Thank you, everybody, for doing this. It's a crazy privilege to be able to have a conversation with you all and to listen to your stories. I'm more interested in your stories than my own, so excuse me if I don't talk too much. I'm a first generation Korean. I was born and raised in Santa Barbara. And due to the pandemic, I was living in LA for a little bit and then came to Santa Barbara, and that's how More Donuts started. I was doing some project management, some marketing, some accounting, a little bit of everything. So it's kind of crazy how all of this started, but immensely grateful for the opportunity to be back and to be doing what I'm doing.
So Tommy, maybe tell us a little bit more about the concept behind More Donuts.
Oh, yeah, it's so More Donuts is currently what I'm serving it's mochi donuts. So it's this beautiful hybrid of something that's Western, donuts. We often, think of donuts, we connect that with America or like the West, and mochi, obviously, which has Japanese and Asian origins. And it's this beautiful baby between the two, mochi donuts. But more than that, I see it as an opportunity to bring all sorts of, people from both aisles to the middle and to have a conversation, and just the opportunity to serve them and to listen to their stories. And any way that I can weave their stories, their culture into what I'm doing, that's what really I'm looking for to do. And it's just, it started because of in the pandemic, my main goal was really more than the donuts was, how do I, in this difficult time, how do I spark joy in people? And donuts is simply just a vessel to kind of do that. So it's been such a huge blessing to meet people and to, I think my mission was how do I spark joy in people, but they've been doing it to me. So I'm just so grateful for every single person that I've connected with and reconnected with, like you, Kai. So.
I love it. Yeah. I think too, there's something so great about food as a way to bring people together. So I'm really excited. I haven't had the pleasure yet of trying your donuts, but I'm very excited to try them when you are back up and running. So we have kind of an interesting group here tonight, we're all, despite all being part of the Asian American Pacific Islander community, I think we all have very kind of diverse backgrounds. We also are all happen to be children of immigrants. And, I think about sometimes in America, I think there's something like 22 million Asian Americans that belong to, I think, over 50 ethnic groups. And so, especially in a place like Santa Barbara, where the Asian community is relatively small, I think sometimes people, who are not part of the AAPI community, forget how kind of culturally diverse that experience can be. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about each of you kind of tell, as children of immigrants, tell a little bit more about your family's kind of migration story, and maybe, challenges that arose for them, maybe how that experience has influenced you in the work that you're doing, and shaped your philosophies. So maybe Allison, we'll start with you.
Sure, I'd love to. Both my parents immigrated from Taiwan in their early 20s. My mother actually came here to help my grandfather with Shanghai when they first got up and running. And my dad attended college in Texas, but his sister, my aunt, also, they kind of settled down in Santa Barbara and had brought over my grandparents. So it was kind of a natural move for him to also join with the rest of the family. And my parents actually met here in Santa Barbara through mutual friends. The Chinese community, I believe, probably wasn't huge back when they first settled, so everyone kind of knew each other. Everyone was also in the restaurant industry, so that's kind of how they all met and mingled. So yeah, my parents were introduced to each other and got married and started their family here, and that's where I came in. But as far as challenges, my parents had actually started a restaurant or two before Shanghai as well. Or actually so Shanghai was already in operation, but my parents branched out and actually opened, I think it was called Miss Egg Roll on State Street. And that didn't take off too long. So I think they decided to stick with Shanghai since it was a little more established. But yeah, they haven't really shared much of their stories with me, and I also haven't really asked. And I don't think it was until recently, with all the violent attacks against our community, that I was like, whoa, I actually don't really know too much about my parents and their background. So that definitely helped kind of spark a little bit more of this conversation with them. And I think it's kind of natural for the elderly AAPI to also kind of keep that to themselves as well. So, but I would love to hear what Jill and Tommy have to share.
Yeah, Jill, let's kick it off to you.
Awesome. Yeah, so both my parents also came to the States in their 20s. My mom came to California first not first, but she came to California in her late 20s with only a couple of $100s in her pocket and a ring that her brother gave her to pawn, which I think is kind of fun. And she comes from like a lower to middle class family in the Philippines and was brave enough to come to California totally alone. She's only one of 6 kids that have moved to the States. And even now we have like distant relatives that live here now, but back then she was the pioneer of coming to the States for her family. My dad moved in New York City before moving to California. He loves talking about it. It's like, oh, I lived in Long Island for 10 years. He lived in Long Island for like 10 years and in New York City, and lived on the floor of his aunt's apartment. And he painted the side of buildings for a few years to support himself. And he did have quite a bit of support. He's one of 8, and all of them now live in the States. And fun story. My grandpa he comes from a little bit of a higher-ish class in the Philippines. And my grandpa was the first Filipino to graduate, to get an engineering degree in Minnesota. So yeah, very, very random. But so yeah, he was just a little bit more established than my mom. And it's funny that you say that, Allison, that like you haven't really connected with or haven't asked your parents about their challenges, because you know, I haven't really asked mine either. Partly because I'm a little bit afraid of the truth in a way. I know that my parents probably have had a lot of struggles that they may not feel comfortable talking to me about, because they've always wanted to show their strongest side. You know, like my mom never shows her weaknesses. But I think, you know, especially in the last few months, it would be nice to spark that conversation with them. That being said, I know that they have gone through challenges, especially in business. They have like nursing homes and things like that. And yeah, like I mentioned before, they grew up from the ground up. So like any entrepreneur, plus a little extra, I'm sure that they've had lots of great challenges.
I'm always so amazed by the resilience of immigrant communities, you know, and I mean, especially to trying to navigate that experience in the United States that has such a history of systemic racism, and trying to really break those barriers. And I mean, I think that that's part of what's so important about recognizing May as, you know, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, although we should be celebrating, you know, we should be celebrating this every day, but to really take pause and reflect and celebrate, like, you know, this is, you know, this is where we've come from, and you know, the adversity that people have had to overcome. So thank you for sharing. Tommy, tell us a little bit about your family's migration story.
Yeah, so I'm Korean. Both of my parents are therefore from Korea. I guess in short, my mom, she came here because of my dad. They got married. My dad, he came here because I think he has 6 siblings, something like that. The oldest sibling, my aunt, she actually came to the States she got married to somebody who was in real estate in Santa Barbara. I don't think that's talked about much in our family, about just how that happened. I think we all kind of know, but I think she was willing to do that in order to bring everybody over, because my dad's side, they grew up in an incredibly poor rural area of Korea, in a single parent household. My father's mother passed away at a really young age. So it was them taking care of each other just in the countryside. So she brought all of them over, and most of my family, they're in Santa Barbara, but they're kind of scattered throughout, and just really lucky to see that, you know, they're all doing pretty well, just in terms of living situation and jobs. My dad, he kind of early on, he started a martial arts business in downtown on Delaware, which is where I did the pop-up first. And it's kind of funny because I was pretty embarrassed that my dad was teaching martial arts, because it just felt like, oh man, this is so like Asian, and like it kind of feeds into the stereotype. And but looking back, I have a lot of respect for what my dad was doing, because a lot of his students weren't Asian, coming that in the early 80s and starting that. And I grew up seeing so much mutual respect between the non-Asian community and with my dad, and he was teaching them about our culture. And it's funny because even now his students will, who aren't Asian, will, when they see me, they'll greet me with a bow. I'm like, what? Like this is weird, this is awkward. But you know, I should be doing that, and they're teaching me and like reminding me, like just showing each other honor and you know, gratitude for each other's presence. So it's cool to kind of now, where, you know, being where I'm at now, just seeing that with I don't know, gratitude what my dad's done, and I think I'm definitely taking that influence and trying to do that through whatever I'm doing now. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I think that's also such a great segue to one of the questions that I wanted to ask next, which kind of gets to the heart of why we put together this series. So the series is called Santa Barbara Belonging. And I think oftentimes, especially in a community like Santa Barbara, where, you know, I've heard people say like, oh, Santa Barbara's not diverse, which personally, I always have a hard time hearing that, because I'm like, well, hold on, because, you know, there are people of color here who represent very diverse multicultural backgrounds. And when you say it's not diverse, you know, you're kind of invalidating, you know, the experience of you know, you're invalidating the multicultural experience. That being said, you know, the AAPI community here is also very small, right? And so I think, you know, myself growing up here and being biracial, you know, I spent most of my life, I mean, even now, like still trying to figure out how to fit in, like, where do I belong? And, you know, every community, every town, right, has a different, you know, unique kind of identity. And the history of Santa Barbara, I think, is pretty layered and complicated. And yet it's a beautiful place. And I think, you know, in general, people seem to get along. So the question that I would really love to ask each of you is, can you talk about what belonging means to you and what community means to you? And we can just kind of do roundtable again. So I'll start with Allison.
Yeah, so, you know, growing up in Santa Barbara, I used to actually say that it doesn't feel diverse. It's not diverse. But I mean that in terms of like grade school, I was the only Asian kid in my class up until maybe 4th grade, when another Chinese boy transferred in. And then it was just us two. So it was kind of hard, like not seeing similar faces and not having anyone to share my culture with at school. But luckily I had Chinese school on Sundays, which was about like 5 hours of different classes and activities that kind of taught us about our language, our culture, and our history. And that's where I got to connect with what I would say would be my community, because all these other Chinese kids, they were also straddling, you know, the American culture and their Chinese culture. So I didn't feel like I had to hide a part of myself or explain a part of myself. I kind of felt at home there. And it wasn't just at Chinese school. We would have these giant potlucks and giant parties and get-togethers where all the parents, all the kids, we'd all just hang out, play games. And to me, that was where I belonged. That was my community, and not so much my American friends at school. So I was lucky to have that, at least. Otherwise, I feel like I kind of would have been a little bit lost. And it was kind of hard since I didn't really get to go to school with them until junior high or high school. And then that was kind of when I feel like I was more in tune with my cultural identity, because I finally got to be with my peers and be with people like me and have common experiences. So.
Yeah, I definitely can relate to that a bit. I mean, you know, being part of this small Asian community that grew up here, it's funny. It's like Santa Barbara is small, so people always say like, oh, it's 1 degree of separation in Santa Barbara, but it's like half a degree if you grew up here and you happen to be Asian too. But yeah, thank you for sharing. Jill, I'd love to hear your response to what belonging and community means to you, especially as I feel like so if anybody in the yoga community knows Jill, like Jill is a powerhouse. But then I also was kind of curious to ask you also kind of in relation to this question, you know, being Filipina, I don't know if you know this or not, but the Filipina community is actually the largest AAPI community in Santa Barbara. And so I'm curious, as someone who didn't grow up here, have you been able to, you know, to find that community? Yeah.
Yeah, Thanks for the compliment. You know, just talking like straight up and with like complete honesty and vulnerability, I'm still working on connecting with my heritage. I grew up in a very white neighborhood, basically in the suburbs of LA in Santa Clarita. There was definitely diversity there, but you know, my parents, specifically my mom, really wanted me to be American. Like she would say things to me like, when you get older, I want you to marry a tall white guy with a pointy nose and blue eyes, and just like things like that, just drilling it into my mind that like integrating, belonging, and integrating into a white community would in some way like help me get ahead in life. And so these are realizations that I've honestly had in just the last couple of years. And I guess like, so the way that I would see belonging now for me is being able to just be like my authentic self within the greater community, whether you know, whether it's a predominantly white community or an Asian community, because to be honest, growing up, I never felt like super welcomed in like smaller Asian groups. And I would love to just belong in all of the worlds, you know? And then here in Santa Barbara, I didn't know that fun fact, Kai, but now that I'm thinking about it, I can kind of imagine it. I still have like very few Filipino friends. I'm really lucky that my first job straight out of college, my manager was a Filipino dude, and we're like best friends now. And he's more like my brother, you know? And so it was really nice to have that Filipino influence, because to be honest, I'm an only child. I've never obviously had an older brother, and someone to kind of like pull me back in to Filipino culture, like make me Filipino food. And there's nothing better than like cracking Filipino jokes, like inside jokes with another Filipino person, you know? But yeah, I'm still working on the feeling of belonging and what it means for me, especially here in Santa Barbara, where there is like slightly less than 4% Asian population. Yeah, that's my honest truth.
I really appreciate you being honest. You know, I think, you know, hopefully people in the audience can kind of get a sense of just how different our experiences can be, but yet also like at the same time still feel isolating. I think, you know, the hope is that by opening up dialogue and talking about these things, that we can cultivate this like greater sense of really belonging. You know, and I'd say too, just to kind of give nod to an appreciation to our committee who helped put together this series. I mean, we talked at length about, you know, some of them have had family, you know, they've been in Santa Barbara for generations, that have been, you know, contributed to the AAPI communities, and others, you know, are, you know, first generation and et cetera. But, you know, I think that just in the face of just trying to combat, you know, racism and you know, racial intolerance or microaggressions, right? I mean, I think that this is a way to really assert like, no, we belong here, we're celebrating who we are, and we're coming together. And yeah, so I appreciate the more authenticity and honesty, the better. Tommy.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think that's something that's a question that I asked a lot growing up, and even now, like you, Jill, trying to still figure that out. I think maybe early on it felt more race-based. Now it's more like, I don't know, just other things. I think, you know, belonging is when you have to really stop, when you don't have to ask that question, when you don't think about it, when you're around people and they don't make you feel that way or make you think of that question, that's when you really feel like you belong. And I'm really fortunate that, you know, Kai, our group of friends, they're diverse, and like I cherish those friendships so much. And ironically, going to UC San Diego for college, I thought, wow, like the first thing I noticed, like, dang, 90% Asian, I'm home. Like, this is it. This is like, and I had a really hard time, like, figuring out where do I belong. And I hung out with a bunch of Korean Americans thinking that I would easily like make a ton of friends, but I was actually really lonely. And like, I missed our circle of friends that again, were diverse. And they made me feel like I belonged. And it had nothing to do with race, had nothing to do with background, nothing to do with culture. They just made me feel loved and accepted and didn't have to think about that question. Yeah, and kind of, yeah, that's so, there's so many levels to that. Like even seeing my best friends growing up in high school, they're like 6'5" varsity basketball, football players. I'm like the token Asian guy, and like trying to figure out where do I belong in the system, and just how they do life, like going to their homes and seeing how their family life was. And then I would go home and I would feel I didn't belong in my own family, just the way that they were doing things, and made me question, how do I belong in my own family? So yeah, it was just a lot of that question of belonging was so like in the forefront of my mind growing up. And yeah, I'm grateful for those moments where our friends, or I didn't have to think about that. But yeah, I think to me it's community and belonging is really when they accept you, and you have to stop asking that question or thinking about that.
Well, you definitely belong here, and I'm so glad that we've reconnected. Because I agree with you. I mean, I think, yeah, for me too, being able to have a diverse Asian group of friends, was I think really formative for me as well. So one thing I've heard even recently, in light of all the kind of racial tension that's come up, I hear sometimes white folks in Santa Barbara say, well, there's no racism in Santa Barbara. And when I share some of my own experiences, especially because I know given on the day, circumstance, whatever, I can be white passing and I have white privilege being biracial. They're so shocked when I tell them about like, no, I've been othered and I've been exotified and, discriminated against in these really strange kind of, sometimes it's less obvious and subtle. But I think, there's so much to say about this, but I think it might be helpful for the audience, if you're willing to share, what kinds of examples of racism or racial microaggressions that maybe each of you have experienced. I think this is particularly interesting when you talk about it in the business setting. I think back to growing up, oftentimes it was like in my circle of friends is where I got the most, probably, experienced the most microaggressions, because people would say things without realizing like, oh, that's harmful. But yeah, I think for me now, being in the professional world and a lot of the work that I do is to provide funding for Title I schools and low-income schools and really wanting to support marginalized communities. And so I think about this a lot, and it's amazing just how much more education I think needs to happen, even in a business setting. So would you be willing to share maybe an example of racial microaggression you've experienced here in Santa Barbara? And Allison, you can.
Oh gosh, where do I even begin? I feel like me and you have had conversations about this before. And, surprisingly, most of the microaggressions happened in the restaurant. And it was always so shocking to me because that's like my second home. And for someone to essentially come into my home and insult me, it was always it never sat right with me. It always kind of felt like a slap in the face. And my parents, not understanding the full nuances of the English language, half the time they would, shrug it off or say like, you're taking it too personally. It's just a joke or whatever. And that would irk me even more. But that's also part of their generation, I feel like, to take everything in stride and to brush it off and, just to keep going. But as far as microaggressions and racism, where do I begin? What's my real name? Where am I really from? Do you need someone to practice English with? Why do I speak English so well? The more offensive ones at the restaurant, you know, do you have dog, cat, elephant on the menu? Which is, yeah. Are you a geisha? I think the one that stuck with me the most was like a 10-year-old boy asking me why I sound like I'm from here. And then his mom just kind of laughed it off, didn't say anything, and just stared at me and laughed. And then he continued with, "Isn't America great?" And I was just so shocked. I like didn't really know how to respond. I honestly, I don't think I did, because it's a 10-year-old boy and his mom is just staring me at the face in my face laughing. And I just collected their money, and then they just went off. And I think it took a while for me to kind of find my voice and stand my ground, especially in like a hospitality and service industry. You're taught that like the customer is always right. And especially I feel like in Chinese culture too, you know, you're trying to assimilate, you're not trying to make waves. So it was definitely a learning curve for me to kind of find my voice and stand my ground and not accept comments like this from anybody, even our customers. And during COVID too, we had a lot of people call in and ask if it was safe to eat, if anyone had traveled, or, you know, and they would say like, because, you know, and they didn't want to further explain themselves. And it's like, why do you have to assume that because we're a Chinese restaurant that our workers have COVID or are ill, or that you even have to ask this question? Like, are you calling American restaurants with these same questions? I doubt it. So it was like, yeah. Now that I haven't been in the restaurant for a while, in retrospect, it's kind of like, wow, I didn't actually realize how often, like on a daily basis, I had to kind of deflect these comments. So I hope by having this conversation, it can educate and bring awareness to some people, because I know some of these people making the comments probably don't even realize that these microaggressions are alienating or racist or othering. So hopefully now you guys can kind of understand how that makes us feel. But as far as my beauty industry, I don't think I've ever had any type of negative. Luckily, I haven't yet had any negative experiences there. Everyone's always, I think maybe because it's more one-on-one, and a lot of my clients tell me that it's almost kind of like a therapeutic session to just sit there, relax, and kind of talk one-on-one, personal level with you. I've never had to deal with anything like that there. So the restaurant was kind of like where I put on my armor, and then the studio is kind of where I felt like I could be more vulnerable and just be myself and relax. So
thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think, you know, and it is, I mean, I'm so grateful for you all being willing to, you know, be vulnerable and share your stories, because I think this is what it takes in order to not just educate those who don't identify within the AAPI community, but also I think to inspire and encourage others, you know, and to empower other people within the AAPI community to find their voice, and to, you know, to encourage people to, you know, there's so much resource out there available for bystander training. You know, so next time if that mother who let her 10-year-old boy say such awful things, you know, she can realize like, oh, yeah. All right. I also want to be mindful of time too here, but so Jill and Tommy, you know, I'll let you share your comments too, and then I have a question for a question to the audience. So Jill.
Yeah, so I feel like in my industry, also Allison, my heart is with you. I'm so sorry that you've had to go through that. It, like, honestly, I'm like about to cry. Okay. So, but I do feel pretty lucky in the yoga industry, that, you know, there's definitely racism in yoga for sure, and cultural appropriation, and I can just like go on and on about that stuff. But people are generally pretty, sorry, my dog's barking in the background, generally pretty respectful. But I think, you know, Allison, you mentioned that sometimes, and I think Kai, you mentioned this, that sometimes people don't realize that they're microaggression, that they're even making microaggression, or that that microaggression is racist. And the thing that I deal with the most, like every month, is that no one realizes until like much later that I'm the owner of the studio. They will say things like, when they connect the dots, they'll be like, wait, you're Jill? I thought there was another Jill. And even literally just last week, one of our students who comes to the studio a lot, she's really sweet, like I like her a lot, but I see her every month for the last 3 years. And she was like, Jill, congratulations. I was like, thanks. For what? And she was like, for taking over the studio. And I was like, I've owned the studio for 3 years. You know, and she was like, seriously? You know, and it's funny because like I put Jill owner on lots of our marketing materials and whatnot, and people just don't make the connection that I am that Jill. And I think that, you know, it could be because I look young or whatever, but I honestly think it's because people don't expect that an Asian woman owns a yoga studio. An Asian woman owns what has historically been in Western culture a white woman, white man owned business, you know. So that's the microaggression that I deal with like every month.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that. I mean, I think yoga in general too, there's so much, there's a lot of conversation, which we'll have to say for another panel maybe, about cultural appropriation and how to reconcile with that, you know, as well, since yoga in itself is an Indian practice, right? Mm-hmm. So, thank you for sharing that. And I'm sorry that, you know, I've been in the studio with you and have kind of seen some of these things. So I was curious to see if you would share about that. Tommy.
Oh yeah, there are 52 participants here, and I know someone in here, Petey, with Your Choice, and he's told me stories. So everybody in this group have stories. So I mean, I would love to hear it. It's yeah. Anyways, for me, Allison, yeah, that's horrible, obviously, and I've gotten that too. It's like, oh, where are you really from? And then I tell them, oh, Korea, and then they go, oh, which one? I'm like, South, obviously, because if it was North, I wouldn't be here. It's like, yeah. But going back to what you're saying, how some of the people in the white community don't see racism, and like maybe there is, I feel like there is, from their perspective, I feel like maybe they feel an unfair amount of burden that they need to really watch out. And I feel like they're putting in a lot of work, and I see that. And maybe, yeah. So I want to commend them, just because I feel like they have been doing a lot of work and putting in the effort. And the racism that I feel like I've experienced the most in Santa Barbara, and I know I'm fortunate, or it's not fortunate to say, but I feel like it's typically from other minorities, other people in the minority community who feel like, oh, I can't be racist because I'm a minority. So they'll say things without thinking. Whereas I feel like maybe the white community, they're extra careful. They feel like, oh man, like if I say the wrong thing, it could really, but I think in terms of something more recent, I'm probably the youngest, or my business is the youngest out of everybody. So I'm currently in the process of looking for a building, and like in the process of signing a lease. And that process has been really eye-opening. The owners, who are kind of old, they're from Bakersfield, and I kind of told them about just the philosophy behind my donuts, and just bringing in new cultural ideas and ingredients and education. And the owner's like, well, give me maple. That's what I like. I want to try maple. Instead of kind of like, hey, let me try what you're offering. I want to learn. Someone well, my agent, and I don't think she's racist, but like it kind of goes back to microaggression. It was me and PD with Your Choice. We're looking at the space, and she looks at us, and I'm Korean, he's Thai, and she's like, "Oh, that's great. Do you know any Chinese restaurants that could go here?" And it just kind of like, we're looking at each other like, did she really say that? Like, neither of us are Chinese, and she just kept kind of asking that. And most recently, they changed my unit to be next to a Japanese restaurant, or potential Japanese restaurant. And their reasoning was, oh, we think that you guys will be better fit together because, you know, you're doing mochi donuts and they're Japanese. And I think it makes sense. And for me, it's like, well, there's going to be a coffee shop at the end. And I think donut and coffee makes more sense. But they never asked me that question. They just assumed, hey, Japanese restaurant, mochi donuts, you guys are, you know, match made in heaven. We're going to stick you both to the end. And I didn't have a choice. Yeah. So I think that's something that happened really recently that I was just like, wow, like this is happening. All right. But again, I don't think it was intentionally like, hey, let's be racist today, but it was definitely like, you know, didn't sit well.
Yeah, you had shared that story with me, you know, as we were kind of putting this panel together. I was hoping that you would share that because I think it is pretty eye-opening of just how kind of subconscious or subtle, right? Like, you know, and especially too, if you think about just the lack of adequate ethnic studies and multicultural studies in K through 12 education, you know, it's just like, you know, it's learned behavior, right? Really. And so unless you have lived that experience yourself, I think it can be, you know, challenging to yeah, there's some work that needs to be done. Yes, it's a form of redlining, but yeah. So I think at this time, I'm curious to ask the audience, and maybe for anyone who's maybe new to the term microaggression too, microaggression is it's a statement, action, or incident that is regarded as an indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group, oftentimes used, you know, racially or ethnically. So yeah, I'm curious, and maybe Deannie, if you wouldn't mind putting up the poll. I'm curious how many have experienced racism or some form of racial microaggression in Santa Barbara. Yeah, I have, while we're waiting. And one of the other things you said, Tommy, that I thought was interesting was that some of the microaggression you've experienced has been from other minority groups. And I've definitely felt that myself as well. And I think that there's, again, I mean, I hope that this is like a series of like many more opportunities to come because there's so much to unpack. But you know, for me, I really truly believe that the liberation of one marginalized group, you know, can help the liberation of other and all, you know, BIPOC and marginalized groups. And so I think there needs to be more, you know, hopefully as we start to have more of these conversations, you know, there can also be supplemental conversations about educating, you know, that these different minority groups we're not taking a piece of the pie away from the other, right? Like that's not what it's about. And that how can we kind of bridge intersectionality and, you know, come together in solidarity. Wow. Yeah. So 76% of our attendees have experienced racial microaggression in Santa Barbara. I'm really sorry to hear that, but also not surprised, which is why I think, you know, these conversations are really important. So we only have a few more minutes. So I wanted to kind of end on, yeah, maybe just looking to the future and, you know, looking to hope and optimism. I've really been trying to celebrate this mantra for myself, you know, celebrate the small wins, look at the bright spots. You know, in this last couple of years, it's been, you know, with COVID, it's been very challenging. And, you know, there's a lot of conflict in the world. And so, you know, what can we do locally to kind of spread joy, whether it's through donuts, yoga, taking care of your beautiful lashes. Yeah, I think we all have, you know, a choice to create change in our local community and supporting each other. So, I mean, I think also, Allison, I think about this, especially with you being a new mother to a beautiful biracial little Hapa baby. What do you all hope to see change or improve for the future kind of AAPI community? Or maybe, you know, what are things that you hope that we collectively as a greater Santa Barbara community can celebrate more?
Realistically, I know he's going to have his own experiences with racism and discrimination. And obviously, as a mother, I don't want him to have to go through any of that, but I know he will. And I think the only thing I can do is probably, you know, help him navigate through that as best as I can and be an open ear and give him some of my experience as well, kind of walking the line between being Chinese, Taiwanese, but also growing up in an American culture. I really hope his generation will, you know, be more accepting or more open and more inclusive. I hope they'll be better educated, and you know, I hope they'll want to celebrate cultural diversity and differences instead of using that to kind of tear each other apart. I think about you a lot too. And I know you've kind of mentioned before, it's hard feeling accepted by either side. So I think that's something that he will probably feel as well. And again, I just hope for the future generations that they learn from kind of what we're going through now and the changes that we're making now, and then improve and make better changes for their group. So yeah, he's only 8 months, but I've already gotten, you know, the comments of like Asian babies or halfies are like the most beautiful, or like, you know, yeah. I'm sure you.
Oh boy, I just had like a flood of just like childhood traumas come back to me.
But you know, we're walking, like we went to Disneyland on Monday, and surprisingly, it was an Asian lady who walked by, and she just looks in the stroller and head nods at me and says, "Half Asian, huh? He has red hair. All of my halfies have red hair too," and then walked away. And I was just, I didn't really know if that was supposed to be like, yeah, we're connected because we're both Asian and we have half Asian babies, or if that was just like awkward and weird. It was kind of strange, but.
Huh. I don't have red hair.
Like, okay. But yeah, I just hope for the better for him, obviously.
Thank you. Jill, what about you? What do you hope to see improve? Or what do you feel like is working really well? Yeah. Any kind of parting words you want to say?
Yeah, you know, I mean, if we're talking about like younger generations or whatever, what I was talking about before about like really struggling with my identity weighs on me very, very heavily. And I start crying. I'm sorry. I'm feeling really emotional. I don't know why. The sense of belonging is so important, and to not feel that is really difficult. So whether you're from like an Asian heritage or Black heritage, Indigenous heritage, I just hope that, you know, we live in a world where we can all like feel welcome and feel where we can feel like we can be ourselves, where we can be both proud of our heritage as well as celebrate different heritages, you know. Sorry, I'm getting so emotional. I don't know why, but yeah, I feel really grateful for this conversation and to be a part of it as someone that, you know, is like struggling with, currently struggling with like identity. But yeah, the sense of belonging, and I think that the title of this panel is like spot on. So yeah, I just hope everyone can feel that.
Well, you're definitely not alone, and I love and appreciate you so much, and the work that you're doing in our community to help create space for other people to heal is incredibly powerful. So own that and know that you're part of a community that really is grateful for you. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's even just in the history of Santa Barbara. We look at the trust is located downtown on Canna Perdido, and that area of town has so much cultural significance, and so many landmarks of communities that have once thrived there, whether it was the Irish, the Italian, the Blacks, the Central Americans. I mean, there were a lot of Asian populations that used to thrive there too. And, unfortunately, over generations, some significant cultural landmarks and icons weren't preserved. And so a lot of that history has been lost, right? Or I shouldn't say lost, because I think there's enough that's getting passed on generationally that we can find it. And so I think that's why it's so important to be able to support, the work that organizations are doing, like the Trust for Historic Preservation. I mean, trying to kind of expose these histories and help people maybe reclaim some of their lost, heritage, and feeling connected, and being able to kind of, reach over the aisle and realize, like, oh, I didn't realize that maybe, you've experienced a similar kind of microaggressions or a challenge of feeling isolated, even though you are from a totally different ethnical background. So Jill, thank you for sharing. Tommy, what do you hope to see kind of improve, or what would you like to celebrate for the future AAPI community here in Santa Barbara?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that I want to say is I'm incredibly hopeful. I don't think I would have done what I'm doing now if I hadn't looked at the landscape and seen, people trying. I see so many people trying and putting in the effort. So everybody in this group and outside of this group, thank you. I want to acknowledge you. And that it's sad that, in every one of us, there's that want to belong, and that's okay. Like, that's okay to have that feeling, and beautiful things can come from that. And, at the end of the day, I don't really care about donuts. I just want to make sure that everybody feels like they belong and that they deserve kindness. And I'm just incredibly hopeful. So thank you for this. And yeah.
Thank you all so much. This has been a really, I hope it's been in some ways healing for all of you. I mean, it's been healing for me. I mean, it was, I got really excited. There were other people that I had potentially reached out to. Sorry, there's a dog in the background. There are other people that I had reached out to, that were multi-generational, and it just kind of panned out that the panelists and the person facilitating were all kind of part of the same same age group, and we all happen to be children of immigrants, and so there's kind of an interesting kind of connectivity there. But I think this is just such a great opportunity to keep the conversation going. And thank you so much to the panelists, and I thank you also. Just seeing the incredible comments in the chat also is wonderful. I really appreciate people being willing to share and be vulnerable.
So this is Therese again. I'd like to thank Kai and Allison, Tommy, and Jill for being a part of this extraordinary series today. I'd like to just do one thing before I close, just to bring it back to the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation. It is such a unique organization. 11 years ago, we formulated the Asian American History Committee, and we have sponsored and hosted the Asian American Film Series and the Asian American Neighborhood Festival. And I would encourage each of you to join us. We are a committee. We're always looking for people to help us. And I think that if I can just share, of our committee members are all from Santa Barbara, but I'm a transplant. I'm born and raised in Indiana. And when I moved here, I did not have that sense of belonging, but being part of the trust and having these programs, a film series, so we look at films that are either Chinese or Japanese. We talk about the internment camps and just experiences, and the Asian American Neighborhood Festival. I have to say, I feel like I do belong here now. This is my home. And what we also do within our committees is we talk about our experiences. And, you know, thank you so much for sharing your personal stories. We all have them, and hearing them more makes it even more important for us to have a venue to share and to be a part of this community. So, you know, our committee is still going strong. We may not have a film series, but we're hoping to have the Asian American Neighborhood Festival. And if not, then we look to 2022. But meanwhile, we'll have additional opportunities to share our stories, perhaps in something similar of this type of a format. So thank you so much. So I'd like to thank again Kai for moderating, and Allison, Tommy, and Jill for joining us. And thank you for being a part of our evening.